and gentlemen, and welcome to Shoot, Punch, Kick, the only podcast in the world where three local Brooklyn heroes talk about the 80s and 90s movies that formed the bedrock of their heroism. Today, Anthony, Telly, and I are transported through our TV screens into the terrifying world of horror icon Wes Craven's supernatural serial killer flick, Shocker. What's going on, boys?
I'm shocked that there was only one pun in that intro.
But I smiled at terrifying, but we'll talk about that later.
Well, it could be terrifyingly good or terrifyingly bad, right? Maybe we're afraid of the quality of what we saw or just we're about to see. All right, so we normally like to start things off by giving our AI overlords at ChatGPT the chance to flex their muscles and give us a plot synopsis. So let's see what our overlords had to say about Shocker. Shocker is a 1989 horror film directed by Wes Craven. The plot follows. The film centers around Jonathan Parker, a high school football player whose family is brutally murdered by a serial killer named Horace Pinker. Through the series of vivid dreams, Jonathan discovers that Pinker is the killer. With the help of his girlfriend Allison and the police, Jonathan manages to capture Pinker. Pinker is sentenced to death by electric chair, but before his execution, he makes a deal with the devil. When Pinker is executed, he doesn't die, but instead becomes a being of pure energy who can travel through electrical currents and possess others. Jonathan realizes Pinker's still alive and continues his killing spree now with supernatural powers. Jonathan teams up with his friends and a detective to stop Pinker once and for all. They devise a plan to trap Pinker in the television broadcast system, leading to a climactic battle inside the TV world. Using his wits and courage, Jonathan manages to defeat Pinker, bringing an end to the terror. The film combines elements of supernatural horror and slasher tropes with Wes Craven's signature style and inventive premise. All right, so let's go into our personal histories with Shocker, but more than just what our personal histories are, I kind of want to ask you what, within the context of that history, what were your expectations kind of going into watching this movie? All right, so I'll go first. And for me, this is a movie that my uncle, there was a time that my uncle lived with me, with my family, and he would bring home, movies. He was a big horror fan. He's responsible for a lot of the, things that I like in film. And this was one of the movies that he brought back. And he was a little bit mean because what he would do is he would use that as a tool, horror films specifically, to make sure I behaved. And so I think it was one of the times where I don't know if I was acting up or something, but he's like, nope, we're watching this. You got to stand here and watch it. I think I was 10, and it was way too early for me. It scared the shit out of me when I was 10. And then subsequently, I think it played on regular television all the time. And whenever it was done, I would watch it. But again, I'm coming into this after not having seen it in maybe 20 years. Shocker. Why don't you tell us your history and what were you expecting going in?
This movie, my experience with it is the box. I feel like this had the most iconic box in terms of my childhood memory. I will always remember it. I never saw the movie, but I always passed it. This is a movie. There's like 4 movies that have that for me. It's Shocker, Monkey Shines.
Oh, yeah.
Okay. Critters and Ghoulies.
You've never seen any of those?
No. But the boxes have always that Ghoulies one in the toilet or whatever with the little thing. Yeah. So they always stuck with me. And so with this one, never saw it. Having seen it, it is exactly what I thought it would be. And also like there was just a big time with especially in the 80s with the boxes where movies were about like they had a gimmick, right? So this one is the guy in the prisoner uniform, the orange uniform, and he wears it throughout the movie. So the movie itself completely delivered on what the box promised, which
what were you expecting, again, without having seen the premise, just like what did you think you were going in, what you were getting into?
Horror movie that's almost a slasher movie where someone dresses in this uniform. It had a lot more in the movie itself than the box suggested, right? But it definitely had this, the image that's behind you on the TV. So when I saw it, it definitely measured up to this image that I had over the last, 4 decades.
All right, Telly, what are your thoughts?
So I think around this time when this movie came out, I was starting to get into horror movies, and I remember seeing the trailer. And I remember the trailer being more serious than the film actually is, and really dark. And I think also around this time, I was really obsessed with not obsessed, but really fascinated by the whole idea of capital punishment and electric chair and all that kind of stuff. So and it seemed scary. The movie seemed scary from the trailer. And for whatever reason, I didn't see it when it initially came out, but I watched it a couple of years ago. I think during the pandemic, I was just trying to catch up with all these movies that I missed when I was younger. And honestly, I barely remembered anything from that initial watch. So watching it again, I caught some details that I missed the first time around.
Cool. Okay, so again, I just kind of initial reactions to it, and we'll get deeper going in, but I feel like this movie is really a perfect encapsulation of the genre and the time. There was some real like over the top gory effects. There was a lot, maybe a little too much melodrama, kind of teen sort of love story. And I think for better or worse, it is really very much a product of the time that it came out and kind of fits in with some of the other contemporaries that it has. So let's just go over a couple of the things having to do with the story that occurred and discuss a little bit. So it's a typical, I think, serial killer terrorizes a neighborhood kind of thing, which I think was common trope for those movies. Captain of the football team in love with his girlfriend. They make sure to make it very clear that they don't have any sex. And it was kind of by the numbers. So first off, I know that the dragging of the foot of the killer has become cliche and is a trope. I was trying to think, is it a trope because of this movie? Were there any other films that had that? And B, if there were other movies that did that, did they come before or after this? I don't know, guys. Am I imagining the dragging of the leg trope?
No, I feel like it's definitely used before this. Even like Terminator had the dragging
that's true
machine, and that's 84. I think it's probably like maybe not the whole time as a character's defining trait, but like usually like at a third act, you got and like, of course, now I can't think of a particular example, but like, I've definitely remembered third act of like trying to get away, even maybe not for the serial killer, but like I definitely had that happen in some of the Friday the 13th of like, because that was the thing that always got the hero person, like the protagonist to kind of slow down a beat. So I don't think this is the start of that.
Telly, any thoughts on that?
On the dragging of the leg, I mean, I didn't find that to be. I feel like I've seen that like in just old horror movies going back to like the Universal, monster days.
I think they don't even also really explain why he would continue to drag the leg even when he's in somebody else's body who doesn't have whatever
they don't explain a lot of things in this movie, but
we'll get to that. Another trope. Oh, go ahead. Sorry, Teddy.
No. You said you keep saying the word trope, and I think that's like if that sums up this whole movie in one word.
Yeah. Well, yes, we will. Yeah, absolutely. Again, going back to tropes, I think this was another. I don't know if this is the first time, but there was a slew of other movies that had this idea of possession of other people, right? And that you didn't really know, is this my friend or is this my friend being possessed in the body of by a serial killer? And I think the leg drag.
Common problem. Yeah.
I mean, who hasn't been there, right? Am I right? Right. I think the leg drag was important as the audience members, so that we know that this guy is actually like the killer. I think there were some other movies. I know that around that time there was The First Power, which I really liked, and then also there was a movie called The Fallen with Denzel that kind of had the same idea. What do we think about this in terms of those movies? Do you think?
I think was probably the best one that did it in the 80s, not counting The Thing.
So I think The Thing is the one, right? I think The Thing is probably the first one, and I definitely would not put this on anywhere near the same kind of pedestal as The Thing. But in relation to like those more later ones, how do you think this holds up? Is this an interesting use of that dynamic, or do you think it failed terribly?
I think that this movie has a hard time holding up, and I don't know if it's because of it. I don't know. I don't think it started any tropes. I think it takes all the '80s horror tropes and puts it in a blender, and just recycled everything. And which is kind of shocking when you realize this is coming from Wes Craven. This is not just some like first time director, doing a low budget movie. And it just reminded me a lot of where Freddy went by the time we got to Nightmare on Elm Street 4, where it became kind of silly, like MTV-ish. And then it also reminded me a lot, when I was watching again, of Freddy's Dead, in terms of the story, in terms of a lot of things that were going on in this movie. Which is very ironic because I know Wes Craven had a falling out after the first Nightmare on Elm Street with New Line Cinema. He didn't like the direction they were going. So I guess he was just trying to kind of create a new franchise, which kind of takes all the worst elements of Freddy as we know him and puts it out there.
Well, okay, so you bring a really good point up, and I guess that's a really good segue to switch over from some of the tropey tropes, and we can talk a little bit about Wes Craven and his direction in this particular film. So again, you're absolutely right. I think that just kind of doing a little bit of research, Wes Craven was not really happy with the direction that the Nightmare on Elm Street movies had gone. He actually had helped pen the story for Nightmare on Elm Street 3, Dream Warriors, which is actually my personal favorite of them. And he was hoping that would be the end of that franchise, and he was really hoping this would be a new franchise. I'm just reading it very quickly. He says Wes Craven allegedly conceived the story as well as the character of Horace Pinker in response to the diminishing quality of sequels. And if we look at this time, I found like this is let's just look at Wes Craven, man. Some of his movies include The Last House on the Left, The Hills Have Eyes, Swamp Thing. He did The Serpent and the Rainbow, People Under the Stairs, New Nightmare, and then of course there's the Scream movies. This movie comes out at a time where he was kind of really making hits, right? Between The Hills Have Eyes, Serpent and the Rainbow was really great. People Under the Stairs were really great. How do you, Dash, feel like this fits amongst the Wes Craven pantheon of movies?
I haven't seen all of his movies, but this was hands down easily the worst. It was and the reason why I laughed earlier was because it's such like it's all the tropes. This movie does so much. It is so undisciplined in just dedicating itself to anything at all. Like there are so many ideas in this movie, and even like there's certain stuff like that are just in there just to be in it. Like the whole him jumping from body to body doesn't really serve a purpose at all, right? Like
it doesn't really relate to his powers, like of electricity or whatever. That doesn't make sense.
Doesn't do anything. And even like it reminded me a lot of which I find funny because this was like the answer to the Nightmare on Elm Street movies, where another movie that did this which was later was Jason Goes to Hell, where he does it because his body blows up. Now this doesn't make any sense in the Friday the 13th series either, but at least in that one there was some sort of narrative, right? Like they blow up his body, he's all destroyed and charred, and then the doctor eats his heart, then they start passing along throughout. In this one, it didn't have that same feeling that The Thing did either. Like, The Thing was, who is this? There's a mystery attached to this one. There was parts in this movie where he would just jump from body to body and there was no point to it. It would be right in front of someone else. He would be in one body. He was in the kid's body for like 5 minutes. Then he jumped into the mom's body, who then jumped immediately into this like random construction worker. It didn't look good. Like the effects, there was no point to it. It didn't drive any like thematic point or anything that drove tension. There were a couple of moments where it was like I could see like it frames the dad, and there was a part where they didn't know that the killer was the dad, and he winks, and there was like a little bit of extra tension that you got from it. But in comparison to all of Wes Craven's other movies, I like the other ones because they took one element and dove really into it. And I think that the cast helps draw those, makes those movies better. So for example, like you have Scream, it dives into the serial killer, the slasher, and then you have a cast of characters that really makes that idea cool. Similar with People Under the Stairs. It's like a haunted house, but you have the hood and you have black characters, and it has like a folklore around it of like being an urban myth, and everything's painted in this like really specific vision. And I love People Under the Stairs, and I like a lot of Wes Craven's movies. This one did not focus on any type of point of view. The cast didn't help expand the idea behind it. It goes into different cliches throughout, and it's like it just felt like it didn't have like one vision behind it to me. And it's not something I think I'll go back to when I look at Wes Craven's catalog of like when I want to see People Under the Stairs, it's like it scratches the itch. No other horror movie has really tackled it to that degree, but this one, it does what so many other movies have done and not as well as any of them. And I'm just surprised that he made this.
Before I move over to you, Charlie, I just want to make one quick point to what you said, Anthony, is that the idea for this initially started as a television show. And given that little bit of context, the fact that there's so many different genres that it's trying to cover, or again, I keep on using the word tropes, makes sense if you consider if this is a long form, we're trying to do 30-minute episodes for a season of a horror TV show. And then I think he had all these ideas for what he wanted to put in there for a TV show, and now you only got 2 hours or an hour and 40 minutes to do this. And I think, I'm not saying it's a justification, but it makes a little more sense to me why there's so many disparate ideas, because it would have made more sense as a TV show.
Then I think that might have been framed differently, right? Like maybe that would have been the case if the movie wasn't called Shocker and the movie was called like fucking, like let's say it's like a Elm Street, right? Like it's a location. You say things in this town are a little bit different because like there's almost like a feel of like an anthology. I could see that.
Sounds
but
like
I think
Freddy's Nightmares, that anthology where like, there's a serial killer that's influencing their evil is influencing the town. But to go back to what you were saying, Dash, I was making a list of all the horror tropes that were in this movie, and I want to just list them out. So
awesome.
So there were 8 that I found, 8 major ones. 1, the main character has prescient nightmares. 2, the main character is a relative of the killer. 3, the main character has a guardian angel who is a recently deceased friend. 4, the killer returns from the dead. 5, the killer can hop into other people's bodies. 6, the killer loves cracking one-liners. 7, the killer can be stopped by a magical talisman. 8, the killer can be stopped by the power of love. And I thought a lot of these fell into some of the Elm Street sequels. And also, it's funny you mentioned Final Friday, because I was also thinking about that a lot as well, because between the body hopping and the magical the magical necklace and all of that. But this movie really, after watching this last night, it just made me kind of rethink all of Wes Craven's filmography, because he's had like really classic hits, but he's also had really like huge misses.
Vampire in Brooklyn, I'm looking at you.
Vampire in Brooklyn, even like one of his last movies, which was a werewolf movie called Cursed. They had to reshoot the whole movie because it was so bad, or a huge part of that movie. So I'm realizing he wasn't a very consistent director, because I just looked it up right now, and this movie came in between two of like my favorite
Serpent
Wes
in the
Craven
Rainbow,
movies.
People Under the Stairs.
The Serpent in the Rainbow and People Under the Stairs, and this movie goes right in the middle of it, which is shocking, no pun intended, to me, because those two movies have subtext. Those movies are about something. Those movies are exploring something, and Shocker is just like completely all over the place.
And then none of the things that it adds has anything to do overall. So like, for example, like the whole relation, the foster system, like it's just there. And that's what there was a point where I just looked at the time of how far the movie was, and it was a half hour in. There was nothing suggesting that there was anything shocking coming up, but at that point we already got so much stuff. We had serial killers, dreams, like angels, pretty much. There was so much in that half hour that didn't even get to what the promise of the movie we were going to watch was. And I just, from there, didn't have much faith that this was going to be handled well.
So I know, Anthony, you're also a big proponent of like rule setting and then following those rules. And it seemed one of the things that occurred to me watching this is, so at the start, there's this kind of dream logic. It's never really explained how the main character, John, can get into in his dreams, get into read the future. I mean, it's explained why they have that connection later on.
The goalpost.
Yeah. that was clearly what it was. But then also, like, how does he know the rules where, remember when he's trying to find his father before the second killing, he's like, all right, I'm going to sleep. Yeah. And then you're going to I'm going to dream what's going to happen. And then when I call you, you're going to wake me up just in the nick of time. Yeah. Which is straight out of Nightmare on Elm Street. And how did you know the rules that what would have happened if in this dream he would have got me? Would I have died? Why is it
or maybe you're not gonna sleep talk. Also, no one else is like mind blown by any of this.
It's on the news. It's on the news, and it's on the news that they're like, a local kid had found him with a dream that he had. And first of all, the news set his ass up. They gave his name. Yeah. They basically almost gave his address. They were like, it's this guy, and he's gonna he's gonna keep on trying to find you. Like, and then the cops didn't do, once this got out of the news, which doesn't make any sense. Talk about put a target on this kid's back. The cops, it didn't occur to the cops like, well, this news is out there. Let me look after my son and make sure that he's all right.
Yeah. Or the main reason why I think that I'm very like rule centric is mainly because I need to know what I should be taking away from this movie and what my response is throughout. The movie throws so much stuff out right at the beginning with no kind of idea for me to know how to respond to it, right? Like, I can be on board with this if this is A Nightmare on Elm Street, but they're like trying to treat it like it's kind of not, right? Like, this is a very grounded serial killer at first, but this other part is very weird, but no one else is kind of addressing it. Some parts he can like kind of interfere with it, but other parts no one else seems to even know what's going on. So it's just disjointed. Like, aside from it not having any rules for the characters to play with, I don't even know what I should be taking away from it as a tone, because if it was set up like, look, this is Wes Craven having fun without all of the limitations of the studio, all right, cool, but nothing happens fully to suggest that's the movie he's making. So when I'm watching it, I don't even know how I should be responding, because I can't even fully have fun, because there's certain parts that are taking it very seriously, and which I just feel like you're not doing what you're setting out to do as a movie.
It's also unclear. So he's got the power to get powers, but did he have powers the whole time he was serial killing people, or did he only get powers when he asked for it at the end? And if that's the case, why did his son have powers?
It doesn't ask that question, so it never answers it. And that was my issue with the movie. It just makes shit up as it goes. Like, suddenly, like halfway in the movie, where he's like, "Oh, I'm weak. I could turn my fingers into like these like nails and stick them into the socket and I'll recharge or whatever. Or I could be zapped into a TV using like a satellite or something," which none of this makes any sense even within the logic of the film. But I was thinking, the tone is completely off, because one second the guy's girlfriend is being murdered, and then the other second it's some goofy thing that's happening. But I thought this would have worked better if it just went full parody, if this went because there's so many cliches in this movie and it doesn't treat them like cliches. It should have just fully embraced it and made this a parody of like slasher movies.
Yeah, I saw some of the reviews where like, this is one of my, it's such a fun movie. And I didn't really start having fun with it until the third act, where it became like, oh, okay, like they're doing the thing that they're setting out to do. That was the first time in the movie that I felt like they were like, you know what, we want this. Because everything that led up to it, like that scene with them in the park, that chase scene in the park was one of the most ridiculous 20 minutes I've spent.
He's just fucking shooting, dodging. He's like, huh? You're not going to shoot me.
This is a collegiate athlete who's like, a star football player. He can't escape this one leg
just gonna have a car accident.
Well, I remember, and even that park scene, I remember like the fallen, as you were mentioning, Carlos, like in that scene, there were like he was wandering around like through the streets, and there, like, he wasn't sure which body the demon was hopping into, right? And in this movie, in Shocker, there's only like 2 people at the park at one time, so it's obvious where the body's going. There's no sense of like paranoia, like in the thing, or any sort of mystery, and you're just kind of wondering. And that is a whole sort of, that's like what feels like it's 10-15 minutes, that whole segment where they're chasing, he's chasing Horace Pinker around, and Horace Pinker's just jumping into bodies. And that was my problem also with the movie, where Mitch Pileggi, even though he didn't really create a distinct character, I would have rather watch him choose scenery than just have these other actors like snarl and pretend to be him.
That's a good segue, Tally. Let's talk about the cast a little. Well, just very quickly, I thought it was also really silly. I think they made a huge point in the very beginning to point out that the main lead is not having sex with the girl. And I was like, why did she make a point to say that? Is it because they're going to, and that's going to be a point later on in the movie where they connect or something? And I think the only reason that they did that was so that they would feel okay with making her an angel. Because I feel like one of the plot points in these slasher films, right, is like, well, once you have sex, then, all bets are off, and it's okay if you die. And I just feel like the only reason that they would have mentioned that this whole time is so that when she comes in as an angel, you'd be all right with embracing the idea that, she's untainted, which is why she went to heaven. But back to the cast. Let's start. You mentioned Mitch Pileggi as Horace Pinker. I think that he's not as menacing or as good in this film as Robert Englund, let's say, in Nightmare on Elm Street. He's no Freddy. But I think if I had to find one actor, one performance in this that, good things can be said, I really, really did enjoy Mitch Pileggi in this role. He just had this evil, I love the fact that I'm evil. There's no redeeming quality. Every single thing that comes out of my mouth. I mean, it's a little bit of a mustache twirly villain, but I think that's what he was going for. And again, once you stop, it's not Hannibal Lecter. He's not out here giving these wonderful, monologues into the human psyche. But for a slasher flick, I thought that I found him relatively menacing. If I was at home and he showed up with a bloody knife, I'd be scared shitless. And it seemed like he really had fun in this role. So, Tully, what'd you think about Mitch in this role?
No, I like him as an actor in general, but I just thought he didn't really create a character in this movie. He was just like, oh, I'm evil. And just, and as of this recording, I think Robert Englund, just got a star on the Hollywood Walk of Fame. And you kind of compare the performances, and Robert Englund, he was able to kind of like create a character based on the body movements, based on sort of, just these kind of idiosyncrasies he created for Freddy. And you can't say that Horace Pinker has any idiosyncrasy. Like if you act like, besides dragging your leg, which wasn't him, right? That was in the script. But there was just nothing to the character at all. Just that came across. It was just like, okay, play an evil madman serial killer.
What about you, Dash?
Yeah, he didn't have anything to work with, nothing. And even when you think about Freddy, like just on paper, has an iconic look. He has a hat, striped shirt, which isn't that it's something that like his silhouette stands out. He kills with a cool weapon. He killed in a cool way of going into dreams and doing all types of stuff. And then he would talk. Then he had like catchphrases and quips about what was going on.
he was a pervert too. So that was, with the flicking the tongue and little things like that kind of like create a character. Whereas like, Horace Pinker, like he's holding a Bowie, the most generic looking sort of psychopath.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So, and the issue that he was on screen for so long before any shocking stuff came in, because if the movie dedicated itself to be shocker, he would be like jumping through. Like I felt like the stuff that worked in this movie was very few. Like the amount of time spent on it was very little, which was really the third act, which I thought was when he was interesting and doing stuff like rewinding. If they let him just do that throughout the film, he would have been much more memorable. But so much of the movie was him standing around, acting with a knife, growling, really not memorable to me.
Yeah.
To me, the memorable performance was the football coach, who I thought was very funny. Just did not fit into this world. So I just found myself laughing almost every time he was on screen.
I think also to some degree you can see the little bit of the sloppiness in this. I mean, when thinking about Freddy Kreuger and the way they designed him to be iconic, I read or I heard in a commentary somewhere that the reason that Wes Craven had Freddy Kreuger's sweater be that weird combination of red and green is because apparently he looked it up, and those are the two hardest colors for your eyes to see at the same time. So even just seeing him with that sweater causes your brain to have some distress in trying to process these two colors. Like that's some real deep, he's like fucking with your brain in there. And I don't see anything in this film that even comes close on Wes Craven's part, which is a shame. But let's move on. So I guess next we should move over to the lead, Peter Berg as Hero Jonathan. For me, I don't know if subsequently I think Peter Berg is a decent actor, but in this film, I don't know if it's a question of he is just at the time a terrible fucking actor, or if he just had terrible dialogue, which made it hard to pull off any kind of acting. He was overly melodramatic. There was just a lot of. And whenever you're supposed to, I didn't believe him when he was supposed, the love affair didn't seem viable. There was no chemistry. I just thought he was absolutely shit in this movie. And I'm not sure 100% if it's his fault or not. Telly, what do you think?
Yeah, he just looks bewildered this whole movie. And it made me think about Mark Patton, the actor that played the lead in Nightmare Elm Street 2, where it was a male lead in a horror movie, and it was, under a lot of great stress and everything. And I thought that we needed more of that. Like this was just sort of a one-note performance, like look scared, look confused, and that's the whole film. Yeah. He just looked. He kind of reminded me of a young Bill Paxton, but without the quirks. And there was just nothing to this character either. Like on the page, the whole thing about him being a foster child and everything, that's just kind of glossed over. It's not explored at all. So he just didn't really have much to work with. So that kind of creates a very uncompelling lead character for us to follow.
So you think it was the script? It's not his fault, is what you're saying?
I'm sure it's a combination of both. Because if there was nothing in the script, he could have tried to do something with the character, right? In terms of his interpretation. But there is no character in this movie. It's just like a little bit of backstory and just being chased around for the whole film.
What about you, Dash?
No, I think he really didn't have much to work off of, and what was going on completely didn't match what happened to the character too. So there were these really big dramatic moments that happened, like his entire family being killed, 15 minutes in, and after that there is nothing in his performance to suggest that his entire family was killed, other than the fact that every once in a while he might mention it. So there were so many really big moments that the character didn't even embrace, so it almost made him seem just completely lost, right?
Yes. And speaking of those moments, he doesn't move out of his house after his girlfriend's murdered and her blood is written all over the walls, but he decides after his coach and his friend, it's time to get out of there.
Yeah, really early, the really slapsticky clumsiness of him running into the football post, and he has amnesia for a bit. Like, it was, some parts were so ridiculous. I didn't know if they were even serious. Like, did he have amnesia? Like,
I think he was just flirting with his girl at that point.
It seemed like he was flirting, but because the tone is everywhere in this movie, I wasn't sure. I was like, did he forget? And maybe it feels like a lot of stuff was cut out and was pasted together in the editing room, because a lot of stuff just doesn't make sense in this movie.
Doesn't fit.
And it just didn't feel earned, which is a script thing, but also like, you know, that you have so many moments where this team is supposed to like rally behind, like none of them had any kind of characters or personalities. And that's what I would assume. That's what I was surprised to see, that even when Nightmare on Elm Street was at its worst, I always felt like the camaraderie of the cast were always at least something. Like they did feel like, as the cast got whittled down to like the final girl or whoever, there was still some sort of like very MTV-ish cast of characters that you did want to see them live, and this movie didn't have that. Yeah, this movie didn't have that with these people of just not relating to anybody, not wanting to root for anyone. And then there was a part where they were like really not a part of the story until about the middle, where they came back in, and by then it just like I just didn't.
Who are these guys?
Yeah, I didn't care about anyone, and it was weird because they had all of these moments where you could see like they had the overweight guy, they had the dude who was like the nerd, like they had all the, again, like they felt like the tropes and the learnings of all of these other movies, but it just didn't have the coherence or like the heart of any of those movies. It just didn't have any like personality to it.
And that's the weirdest thing about this movie, is because we're talking about a movie directed by Wes Craven, who created the template for these movies, and he couldn't even emulate himself. We're talking about this movie as it was directed by someone who was trying to do a Wes Craven movie, which is just very strange to me. A
caricature of itself.
Yeah.
I think that I'm just going to throw this out there, and I think you guys can either answer yes or no, but I also want to throw out Michael Murphy as Lieutenant John Parker, the dad. Again, I don't know if he's just a terrible actor or if he had bad dialogue. Can we say the same to him as we would say about Berg?
Crazy thing, partnering with his son, who's like should not be there. His son is having fucking visions of killers who he should not be there, and
he's on the case of the person who killed his wife and family. Like how are you on the case?
And the response to it is just so mind-bogglingly just like not rooted in any type of reality or just anything that you can buy on a performance level or what he's doing. And it sucks because he's the vessel of this very important character. So I don't know like what he could have potentially have done. Maybe play some of the scenes a little bit like more understated. I don't know. Like it was just a perfect combination of the acting mixed with what they had him doing. He was
totally underwritten. And in terms of an actor, not the most like compelling screen presence either. But he's top billed in the movie, which is strange because his name is the first actor's name that pops up in the credits, which is bizarre. But he needed more scenes with Peter Berg's character in this film to at least establish some kind of relationship, because it's like, oh, you're my orphaned, my foster son. I love you. That's it.
He's kind of just treating him like
the family was killed, and whatever. That's okay. Yeah, let's stay home.
Yeah. All right, so let me just give some quick shout outs to a couple of cameos. You might notice Heather Langenkamp was on there from the Nightmare on Elm Street movies. Ted Raimi was in there. John Tesh, also Richard Brooks. So it did have a couple of nice little cameos. Let's switch over to the visuals. One thing I do want to throw out is that Wes Craven later said, "I'd like to redo Shocker just to get the special effects right because we had a real special effects disaster on the film. The guy who was doing all the visual effects kind of flamed out. He had a nervous breakdown because he was attempting to do more than he could. When he told us towards the end of the movie that not a single one of the special effects was working on a new technique, it became my son's job to find all the negatives and rework this." So it's crazy because when you look at some of the things on here, and we'll talk about the reviews later, it's lauded as being this great triumph of special effects. And while I think the TV stuff was kind of cool, there were other composites that just looked fucking shitty. As how I think this might be one of the earliest instances of, if not computer generated, some weird use of computer filters, especially when he was outside of bodies. I think there was some interesting gore effects, blood splatter. He bit that dude's lip.
That scene just made no sense at all. I enjoyed it though. It was funny in a stupid way because it was so completely out of context.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
The entire movie. This is like, what is this?
So Tully, go ahead. Give us your thoughts on the effects and some of the action.
The effects. So sorry, Wes, but the effects were not the problem in this movie. I thought they were passable for an 80s, an 80s movie. Yeah, but visually, there was just, nothing special about this. And when you think that this is the same movie directed by the guy that made Nightmare Elm Street, which had a fraction of this budget, and he was able to produce some really compelling, interesting visuals, like with Freddy coming out of the wall, right, and little Freddy in the alleyway with just his silhouette and things like that. He doesn't shoot Horace Pinker in any kind of way that suggests he's this threatening, embodiment of evil or anything like that. So there was just no visual flair in this movie, and it just kind of relied on the special effects to create that eye candy.
What about
they would just use it in odd moments too that I felt like didn't fully need it. There was the main moment for me was, I think, the waterbed where the bed turned into water. Completely unnecessary to anything, and it just gets to the point.
From Friday the 13th too. I mean, I think Nightmare on Elm Street too.
That was in Nightmare on Elm Street 4. Yeah, and they did it much better because it was practical. There was no reason to do that shitty waterbed effect in this movie.
And terrible. I think at some point there should have been someone like, "This doesn't look good," or "This isn't necessary." It just seemed like it feels like the movie's like a first draft overall with a lot of ideas. And as far as the effects, there was like a couple of cool moments again in the last act, but aside from that, like really bad like rotoscoping going on, where you can see just like characters being clipped, like their hands just being completely cropped in a just terrible manner. There wasn't that much that made me really. I think the only thing that was from the third act of where it came to the effects, and even then, I don't know if you remember the movie Stay Tuned, which was another like movie where they went through the different channels, and it was done in a better manner. I think probably like 4 years later, and with that one, I think what they took advantage of was like the practicalness of going into like some of the sets. It wasn't the electricity effect that stuck out to me. It was more like when they wound up fighting in the newsroom desk, and then they fought in the church, the televangelist sermon, where I was like, that was cool. It was more of the idea of it and being executed in a simple way, where I thought all of the things that they tried to do with special effects were like the angel with the laser beam coming out. They were just like
she uni-beamed him.
That the big lips that came out of the TV for the first time, where apparently he also does voodoo, and that's where he's getting his powers. And when the moments came out, they didn't enhance the story. Like that's what I think like a James Cameron does well, right? Like,
where did he get jumper cables from? Who gave him jumper cables in his cell?
Yeah,
at some point in the film, you just throw your hands up and you're like, you can do whatever you want. This is like a kid kind of, making a film.
Yeah, there was a couple of moments.
The third act itself, as entertaining as it was, and because it was so ridiculous, that just none of it makes any sense whatsoever. That like they're part of these TV shows now, and everything is live, and I don't know.
And they're also in someone's house, right? Like, remember when they're in that lady's house, and she's very like, they took the remote, like, yeah, like just
Predator
and
2 moment, yeah.
And I think like there is even an idea, like an execution of like, so we're watching that scene. What are you supposed to get from that? Is it that everyone's watching this and they're like us and this is a real moment and they're being, scared and this is a scary moment? Or is this a tongue-in-cheek moment and no one, this is a joke? We're all supposed to be laughing at it. And this is that one scene is kind of what happened throughout the movie. Like, am I laughing at this movie? Like, or am I like, what's the takeaway from it? And this is the end of the movie at this point where they're not even clear on what the takeaway should be from it, and that doesn't have, like, when you watch People Under the Stairs, you're not laughing at it. Like, there's certain parts that are jokes and like what it tried to do, it achieved. This one was just, I have no idea what anything is supposed to be achieving.
I want to give a quick shout out to, although they weren't greatly choreographed, there were a couple of fun moments in the fight scenes, right? At one point, this dude just straight up drop kicks the killer on that rooftop. Like, that was a crazy drop kick. And then I think at some other point, the killer suplexes Jonathan, which was pretty, I mean, again, not great choreographed, but I definitely, when it happened, was like, oh, drop kick,
stood out to me. There was definitely that WWF influence that was coming out of the 80s.
Yeah. All right. So to kind of bring this back around here and close things up again, box office wise, Shocker was released in October 27th of 1989. It earned about $4.5 million its opening weekend, ranking second behind the third week of Look Who's Talking. Ultimately, it grossed about $16 million in the U.S. on a $10 million budget. It was 67th for that year. And then just quickly on some reviews, no surprises here. It's got a 30 on Rotten Tomato.
Dang.
It received a split vote from Gene Siskel and Ebert on their weekly show. Siskel gave it a marginal thumbs up, but Ebert voting thumbs down and explaining, I felt it would have been a better movie if it had played with more rules. And then just lastly, if the movie's metaphors are obvious and pretentious as heavy metal music that punctuates the action, Shocker is at least has the feel of a movie that was fun to make. When you think about every trick that has been thrown but the kitchen sink, it goes into, along with the stove and the refrigerator, all facts. And then lastly, Matt Awesome gave it a 2.5 stars on Letterboxd. I'll give it to Wes Craven. If he's going to make a stinker, he's committed to making it stink in the wildest ways. And we have a review from Letterboxd from Matt Awesome 77. And his review says, I'll give it to Wes Craven. If he's going to make a stinker, he's committed to making it stink in the wildest ways, which I can't exactly argue with. Also, just very quickly, I wanted to make a quick reference to the music. If you're into hairspray rock from the 80s, this soundtrack has some original songs by Alice Cooper and Megadeth. There's some Iggy Pop on there. Wholly appropriate for this type of movie. Nothing too crazy or groundbreaking. I think it was appropriate and I enjoyed it. Brought me back to the 80s. You guys want to make any comments on the soundtrack?
Thought the soundtrack was a lot of fun, but it did not, I don't think it matched sort of Wes Craven's style. It just felt a bit shoehorned in there. And I think similar to what I was saying the last time about just Jim Jarmusch and kind of knowing what to do with the hip hop music that he was trying to incorporate in his film. I felt the same way here. You got this like glam metal sort of like 80s hair metal stuff happening. And the film doesn't really play with that so I don't know, it's a chicken or the egg thing, but I think that was outside of Wes Craven's element. He's not a showy kind of director, and I guess they were trying to go for that here, but just didn't work. I like the music, but just didn't work for this film.
I agree. This is like the opposite of how we felt about Lost Boys, like where Lost Boys just was hitting. Soundtrack was good. Just like when it hit, I was just like, oh, okay, we're doing this.
All right, so I think lastly, we like to kind of wrap up by talking about, if you can find one, favorite scene. Dash, would you like to go first?
But probably the high school coach, the football coach coming out in the shower, where I was just like, this movie is out of control. That scene was really crazy. But in terms of the one that'll probably stick with me, it was the third act. I liked when they were doing the channels jumping through and jumping out into the different sets. I thought that was pretty dope.
Yeah, the montage at the end when they're just jumping from different shows and everything. I felt at that point in the movie, that's when Wes Craven just kind of gave up and just said, look, I don't know what the fuck I'm doing. Let's just have fun.
I agree. It seems like we all had the same idea. I think that scene at the end was the most fun. And I kind of like the idea that you leave the most fun should be at that third act. And I think that was when I was enjoying the movie the most. So it left a kind of decent taste in my mouth. Pause. So ratings. I was thinking what we could use. I'll tell you what I'm going to use is COs with fat lips out of 5. Telly, why don't you give us your review first, your score first?
Oh, I got to give this it's between 1 and 1.5, and I'll say it's because it's coming from Wes Craven. I'll have to give it a 1 CO with a fat stretched lip out of 5.
Dash?
I'm going to give this 1.5 little girl with dragging leg out of 5. It wasn't, if it felt like a movie that was made for me to laugh at and have fun, I would have rated this much higher, but I just left this movie very confused with what it was trying to do and what it made. And I'm happy to have watched this after seeing the box in a video store for, almost 40 years. But this movie was a mess for me.
Okay, and for me, I'm going, I think, in the opposite direction. Once I realized kind of what this was and I turned my brain off, I had actually a whole lot of fun with this movie. Once I stopped trying to analyze it, academically and just kind of all right, he's going to be throwing a bunch of crazy shit at me and one-liners. I actually had a lot of fun with this ride. I'm going to go with 3.5 COs with fat lips out of 5. Because wow. I wasn't just mad about it. I was kind of mad, but I had fun watching it. So that's my score. Next, Telly, I think that you're up to decide what we will be watching next. Telly, take it away.
Yeah, I'm going to pick a film that I've been meaning to revisit for a very, very long time. And it's a classic film from the 80s. And that is 1982's First Blood.
Oh, with Stallone. That's a good one. That's
not
great.
Rambo.
I actually saw it recently.
Because it wasn't called Blood. Rambo. It was called First Blood, the first Rambo movie.
You do not turn it off. Okay, don't get me started. I know the monologues and everything. I'm excited about this movie. I actually own it as well. This is great. Nice. All right, so I think after this, we're going to watch the trailer together. But before we do that, I just wanted to thank everybody who tuned in. Ask everybody to please like, comment, subscribe. I especially hope that you guys can put in some comments for us. Give us some ideas of some other things you'd like to watch. We really want to build this community. So on behalf of Telly, Dash, and myself, and the entire Shoot, Punch, Kick podcast, we're signing off. Have a good day.